I should have died that night, but God blocked it. Everyone told me I shouldn't be alive after that night, but I know exactly why I am. When I first met Mr. Elijah Johnson, I was collecting stories of faith across rural Mississippi for a documentary project. On a sweltering summer afternoon, I found myself on the weathered porch of his modest home in Greenwood. The old wooden swing creaked as he rocked back and forth, his worn Bible resting on his lap. His deep-set eyes held stories that needed to be told, stories of redemption, grace, and divine intervention. The golden hour sunlight filtered through the Spanish moss, hanging from ancient oaks, casting long shadows across his property. There was something sacred about this moment, something that told me I was about to hear a testimony that would change my perspective forever. As we sat together in the fading light, beneath the canopy of southern sky, he looked at me with those piercing eyes and said, "Everyone told me I shouldn't be alive after that night, but I know exactly why I am." This is his story, told in his own words. If you're watching this right now, I'd surely appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories just like mine. And go ahead and type your city in the comments below. I'm curious to know where the good Lord's got his people listening from today. I'm from Greenwood, Mississippi myself, been here all my born days, and I got a story that'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up straight. A story about how the Lord can reach down and save even the most lost soul when it's His will to do so. My name's Elijah Thomas Johnson. Born right here in 1942, back when this town was even smaller than it is now, back when the cotton fields stretched far as the eye could see and folks knew their neighbors by the sound of their footsteps on the porch. I've seen a lot of changes come through these parts, some good, some not so good, but I'm still here. And that's the miracle I'm fixing to tell you about. Why I'm still here when by all accounts I should have been gone back in 1978. You're probably wondering why a man my age still gets up every morning, thanking God for another day with such passion. Why these old bones still bend in prayer for the sun even thinks about rising. Well, sit yourself down, and let me tell you something that happened back in the fall of '78 that changed everything for me. Something that turned this old sinner from a path of destruction to a life of gratitude. People round here, they used to call me Lucky Elijah behind my back. Folks still call me that sometimes, though not so much behind my back anymore, but there ain't nothing about luck in my story. What happened that night weren't no coincidence or chance. It wasn't the stars aligning or fortune smiling down. It was the hand of the Almighty God Himself reaching down to this sinner, and I mean reaching all the way down, 'cause I was about as low as a man could get. Back then I wasn't the man you see today. Lord, no. I was running from God faster than my legs could carry me. Had me a good job at the lumber mill over on Jefferson Davis Boulevard. Been working there since I was 17 years old. Started sweeping floors and worked my way up to saw operator. Made decent money too, enough to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. But I was spending every paycheck at Malco's Tavern down on River Street. Every Friday, like clockwork, I'd cash that check and be sitting on my regular stool, for the ink was dry. My sweet Martha, bless her soul, she'd been praying for me for 15 years by then, but I was hard-headed as a mule. That woman would be on her knees every night, Bible open, tears streaming down her face, praying for her wayward husband. Our 3 children barely saw their daddy sober. They learned early on that Friday night through Sunday morning, Daddy wasn't really Daddy. He was some stranger who smelled funny and talked loud and sometimes didn't come home at all. Martha never complained much. That woman had the patience of Job himself. She'd just press her lips together tight when I'd stumble in at 2 in the morning, banging into furniture and cussing up a storm. She never threw it in my face the next day, never threatened to leave, though the good Lord knows she had every right to. Our oldest, Michael, he was 19 then, and already working at the textile factory in Indianola. Boy had to grow up fast, became the man of the house when I was busy being less than a man. Our daughter Ruth was 16 and helped her mama keep the house together. That girl could cook a meal and tend to her little brother and still get straight A's in school. And little Timothy, he was just 7 years old at the time, always asking when his daddy was going to take him fishing, like I kept promising. Truth is, I was too busy drowning myself in whiskey to take that boy anywhere. That Friday night in October 13th, would you believe it, started like any other, paycheck in my pocket burning a hole. The mill had been busy that week, lots of overtime, so the check was fatter than usual. I remember thinking I could really tie one on with that extra cash. I got home around 5:30, washed the sawdust off and changed my clothes, told Martha I was just going out for a spell. She looked at me with them sad eyes but didn't say nothing, just nodded and went back to mending clothes, her needle working steady through the fabric like it could somehow stitch our broken family back together too. Timothy ran up to me as I was heading out the door, his little face shining with hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. "Daddy, you gonna take me fishing tomorrow like you promised? Bobby Williams' daddy took him last weekend and they caught 5 catfish. His little face was so hopeful it near broke my heart, what was left of it anyway. I ruffled his hair, not quite meeting his eyes. "We'll see, buddy. Daddy's got some things to take care of first." I mumbled something about maybe next time and walked out that door. Didn't know those might have been my last words to my family. Didn't know that God was about to intervene in my miserable existence in a way that would leave no doubt whose hand was guiding the universe. Now the weather that evening had been acting strange all day. The air was heavy, like it gets before a storm rolls in. That peculiar stillness where the birds stop singing and the leaves hang motionless like the whole world's holding its breath. The radio had been calling for thunderstorms, but round these parts, weather predictions ain't always reliable. Back then, we didn't have all them fancy Doppler radars and such. Weatherman was right about half the time, wrong the other half, and folks just learned to look at the sky and make their own predictions. I didn't pay it no mind as I climbed into my old '65 Chevy pickup and headed for Malco's. That truck was my pride and joy. Dark blue with a white roof, bought it second-hand when it was just 3 years old. Kept it running all these years though it was starting to show its age, just like its owner. The muffler had a hole in it that made it sound a lot meaner than it actually was. The bench seat was cracked from years of the Mississippi sun beaten down on it. But that old Chevy had gotten me back and forth to the mill for years, and back and forth to Malco's too, I'm ashamed to say. Malco's wasn't nothing fancy, just a cinder block building with a neon sign, half the letters burnt out so it just read, May O's. Inside was dark wood, cigarette smoke so thick you could cut it with a knife, and the same 15 or 20 faces you'd see every Friday night. Men mostly, though a few women would come in with their husbands or boyfriends. The jukebox in the corner played a mix of country, blues, and whatever top 40 hits Malco thought would keep people ordering drinks. Malco himself was behind the bar, wiping glasses with a rag that had seen better days. Malcolm Jefferson was his real name. Had been running that place since before I was old enough to drink. He was a big man with hands like Christmas hams and a laugh that seemed to start somewhere around his ankles. He'd seen it all and heard it all, and not much surprised him anymore. "Evening, Elijah," he said as I walked in, that familiar nod of recognition that was neither judgment nor welcome, just acknowledgement. "The usual?" I nodded and took my regular seat at the end of the bar. First glass of whiskey went down easy. Cheap stuff, burned all the way down, but I wasn't there for the quality. Second one, even easier. By the third, I was feeling loose, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't even funny. The weight of the week, of all my failures as a husband and father, seemed to lift a little with each glass. That's the devil's bargain of the bottle. It'll take your troubles away for a few hours. But brother, they'll be waiting for you in the morning, and they'll have brought friends. My buddy Jerome came in around 8. He was soaked already. The rain had started coming down. "It's getting nasty out there, Elijah," he said, shaking the water from his coat like a dog after a bath. "They saying it might flood down by the creek. Johnson's store already got water coming in the back door." "Ain't nothing but some rain," I said, ordering another round for both of us. "Mississippi gets rain all the time. What's the big deal?" Jerome gave me that look, the one that said he knew better than to argue with me when I was 3 drinks in. He was a good man, Jerome. Worked at the mill with me, operated the planer. Had 4 kids of his own and never missed a single one of their ball games or school plays. I respected him, though I wasn't living the kind of life that showed it. Now I should tell you, I wasn't just drinking that night, I was trying to outrun something. Earlier that week, Pastor Wilson had stopped by the mill to talk to me. Pastor from the First Baptist Church, where Martha and the kids went every Sunday. He'd caught me on my lunch break, sat right down next to me on that bench like he'd been invited. "Elijah," he'd said, no judgment in his voice, just concern. "Martha's asked the church to pray for you, and I wanted you to know the Lord's put you heavy on my heart lately." I brushed him off, told him I didn't need no praying over, told him to save his prayers for folks who were really suffering, like them children over at the hospital or the old folks at the nursing home. But his words had stuck with me, like a splinter you can't dig out. The way he looked at me, not with disgust or pity, but with this certainty that God wasn't done with me yet. So I was drinking to quiet that voice, to drown out whatever it was trying to tell me. As the evening wore on, the place got more crowded. Folks coming in to escape the rain, I reckon. The jukebox was playing old Motown hits, and a card game had started in the corner. I joined in, though my vision was already blurry enough that I couldn't rightly see my cards. Lost $20 in the first half hour, but I didn't care. It wasn't about the money. It was about the company, the noise, the distraction from that still, small voice that kept trying to break through. Before I continue, if you're finding this story touching your heart in any way, I want you to stick around till the very end. What I'm about to share next might just change your perspective on life forever. It sure changed mine. There's a reason I'm still here to tell this story, and I believe that same God who saved me is watching over you right now. He sees where you are, knows what you're going through, and he's got a plan even when it seems like your ship is sinking fast. The more I drank, the more I felt this strange feeling in my gut. Not just the liquor, mind you. Something else, like a warning. Like when you're walking alone at night and get the sense someone's following you, except there ain't nobody there. I remember looking at the clock on the wall and it read 11:42. For some reason, that time stuck in my head. I felt Martha's prayers tugging at me, like invisible threads reaching across the miles between Malco's Tavern and our little house on Magnolia Street. But I pushed that feeling down with another glass of whiskey. Drowned it like I'd been drowning my conscience for years. Outside, the storm was getting worse. The wind howled around the building, moaning like a lost soul. The rain was hammering on the tin roof so loud we had to near shout to hear each other. Every now and then, a flash of lightning would illuminate the windows, followed by a crack of thunder that rattled the glasses behind the bar. Malco turned on the little television set behind the bar to check the weather report. The reception was bad, all static and snow, but we could make out enough to know this wasn't just any storm. Flash flood warnings were in effect for the whole county. The weatherman, his face serious even through the static, was pointing to a radar map showing bands of heavy rain right over our area. "Y'all might want to think about heading home," Malco said, turning up the volume. They saying the creek's already over its banks in some places. Main Street's got 6 inches of water running down it already. Some folks took his advice, gathered their things and headed out into the storm. I watched them go, part of me knowing I should be joining them. But not me. I was too stubborn, too drunk, too afraid to go home and face Martha with whiskey on my breath yet again, too proud to admit that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have everything under control. Jerome tried to get me to leave with him, said, "Legia, this storm coming in hot. We best be getting home. Sarah's going to be worried sick and your Martha's probably up waiting too." But I was too prideful. Told him I wasn't afraid of no rain, that I'd driven through worse. The truth was, I didn't want to face Martha. Didn't want to see that disappointment in her eyes again. Didn't want to have to make up another excuse for why I was too tired to take Timothy fishing in the morning. So I stayed, nursing that glass of whiskey like it held the answers to questions I wasn't even brave enough to ask. By midnight, the place had mostly cleared out. Just me, Malco, and an old man I didn't recognize sitting in the corner. He wasn't a local, that much I knew. Greenwood ain't that big, and everybody knows everybody, at least by sight. This fellow was a stranger, tall, thin, with a shock of white hair and the darkest eyes I'd ever seen. He was watching me. Not in a threatening way, just watching, like he knew something I didn't, like he could see right through me to all the broken promises and missed opportunities that made up Elijah Johnson. Malco came over and put his hand on my shoulder. "Elijah, let me call Martha to come get you, or you can sleep it off in the back room. This ain't no night to be driving. Creek's probably over the bridge by now anyway." I shrugged him off, feeling that familiar burn of indignation that comes when someone suggests you ain't capable. "I'm fine," I slurred, the words thick on my tongue. "Been driving this road for 20 years. Know every curve and pothole. Sides, the truck knows the way home, even if I don't." I laughed at my own joke, but nobody joined in. That old man in the corner, he stood up then, walked right up to me, steady as can be despite the whiskey I'd seen him putting away. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Son, sometimes the good Lord puts obstacles in our path to protect us from ourselves." I didn't know what to make of that. Still don't in some ways. His voice had a peculiar quality to it, deep, resonant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. And those eyes, they seemed to know things, see things. I found out later he wasn't just some random drunk. The Lord works in mysterious ways, don't he? I stumbled to my feet, threw some crumpled bills on the bar, and headed for the door. That old man, he just shook his head sadly as I passed. I remember thinking, what's his problem? As I pushed through the door into the raging storm. Say, if you're still watching, would you do me a favor? Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. The Lord's got more testimonies coming through this channel, and I'd hate for you to miss a single one of them. And if you've got a story of God's protection in your life, leave it down in the comments. We're all strengthened by each other's testimonies. Iron sharpens iron, as the good book says, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. The rain hit me like a bucket of ice water when I stepped outside. It was coming down in sheets, driven sideways by the howling wind. I was soaked through in seconds, my shirt clinging to my skin. The parking lot was a lake, water up to my ankles in places. I stumbled to my old '65 Chevy pickup, fumbling with the keys, the metal cold and slippery in my wet fingers. The parking lot was empty, except for my truck and Malco's car. Even in my drunken state, I knew I was being foolish, but pride is a terrible master, and that night it had me in chains. Chains I'd forged myself, link by link, with every bottle I'd emptied, every promise I'd broken, every Sunday I'd slept through while Martha got the kids ready for church on her own. When I turned the key in the ignition, the radio came on. It was an old gospel station Martha always listened to, WMQW, the voice of faith, though I usually changed it quick as I could to the country station. This time, though, Andraé Crouch was singing Through It All. I remember the words clear as day. I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. My finger moved to change the station, but something stopped me. Instead, I turned it up, then pulled out onto Route 7 toward home. Now, Route 7 ain't much of a road even in good weather. 2 lanes, no shoulder, lots of curves, trees crowding in from both sides. It follows Roebuck Creek for a stretch, crossing it about 5 miles outside of town. And that night, it might as well have been a river. Water was rushing across the pavement in places, making the truck hydroplane momentarily before the tires found purchase again. My headlights barely cut through the darkness and the rain, illuminating maybe 10 feet ahead at most. The windshield wipers were working overtime, slapping back and forth furiously, but they couldn't keep up with the deluge. The wipers couldn't keep up with the rain. The road ahead was like looking through muddy water. I should have turned around, should have gone back to town, should have swallowed my pride and called Martha to come get me, or taken Malco up on his offer to sleep it off in the back room. I knew it even then, in my whiskey-soaked state. But something in me, pride or just plain foolishness, kept my foot on that gas pedal. That gospel song was still playing, and I found myself humming along, remembering how Martha used to sing it while doing the dishes or folding laundry. About 5 miles from town, Route 7 crosses Roebuck Creek. There's a bridge there. Well, there was. Just a simple wood and metal structure, nothing fancy. Been there since before I was born. As I approached it that night, I could see the water was high. Real high. Almost up to the bridge level. Debris, tree branches, a garbage can, what looked like someone's front porch furniture, was rushing past beneath it. The creek, normally lazy and shallow, had transformed into a raging torrent. Any sober person would have stopped right there. Turned around and headed back to town. But I wasn't thinking straight. I figured I'd come this far. Might as well keep going. Home was only 10 more miles. Just cross this bridge, and I'd be on the home stretch. Besides, I'd crossed this bridge 1,000 times before. What was one more? As I started to cross that bridge, I could feel the water pushing against the truck. The tires seemed to float more than roll, the steering wheel loose in my hands. The engine strained against the current pushing at the undercarriage. The radio was still playing that gospel song, almost like a warning now, the words cutting through my drunken haze with sudden clarity. Through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus, I've learned to trust in God. I remember seeing the bridge railing coming at me fast. I yanked the wheel, but it was too late. The truck hit something, probably a patch of deep water or a piece of debris hidden beneath the surface, and started to spin. The back end fishtailed, breaking loose from the road's grip entirely. Next thing I knew, we was airborne, the truck sliding sideways off the bridge and into the angry waters below. Seemed like time slowed down. I could see the angry water below, black as sin in the night, churned into a froth by the rain and wind. The headlights cut through the rain for a split second, illuminating the surface like searchlights before we hit. I had just enough time for one thought. Lord, I ain't ready. The impact knocked the wind out of me. It was like hitting a brick wall, the sudden deceleration throwing me forward against the steering wheel. Then cold water rushed in fast through the driver's side window, which had shattered on impact. The truck was upside down in that creeping creek, and I was strapped in by my seatbelt, the one time I actually wore it. Can you believe that? The water was rising fast inside the cab, and I couldn't get that belt undone. My fingers were numb, clumsy from cold and fear, my mind foggy from the drink. The cold water was actually sobering me up real quick, but not quick enough, not near quick enough. You know, I want you to take a moment right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear that God is still in the miracle business. There's folks out there struggling, thinking God don't see them or care about their situation. Your one share could be what brings hope into somebody's darkness today. Reminds me of that verse in 2 Corinthians. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. Your share might be the comfort someone's been praying for. Water was up to my chin now. The truck had come to rest upside down, partially embedded in the muddy creek bottom. In the darkness, I could hear that radio still playing, now underwater, sounding distant and ghostly. It was still that gospel song, but gargled and fading. The cold was painful, like 1,000 needles pricking my skin. The water had a peculiar smell, earthy and metallic, like rain and rust and river mud all mixed together, and right then and there, with death staring me in the face, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed, not one of them fancy prayers, just 3 words. God, help me. As the water covered my mouth, I thought about Martha and the kids, thought about how I'd wasted so many years, how I'd traded precious moments with my family for hours at Malco's, how I might never get to tell him I was sorry, how Timothy would never get that fishing trip I promised, how I'd never see Michael graduate college or walk Ruth down the aisle. The water was at my nose now, and I took what I thought was my last breath, filling my lungs as much as possible, though I knew it was just buying me a few more seconds in this world. Just when the water covered my face completely, something happened that I can't explain with human words. There was this light, not like headlights or flashlights, more like the water itself was glowing. A soft, gentle radiance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't blinding or harsh, more like the light of dawn breaking over the horizon, but underwater. And through that murky water, I swear I saw a hand reach toward me. Not a physical hand, exactly. More like the impression of a hand, the idea of help made manifest. Suddenly my fingertips found the seatbelt buckle. It was like somebody was guiding my hands, though I couldn't see nothing through the dark water. The belt released with a click I felt more than heard, and I felt myself being pushed. Yes, pushed by something I couldn't see, toward the broken passenger window. I don't know how I fit through that small opening, especially with these broad shoulders of mine. It was like the metal itself gave way to let me out, like the laws of physics took a coffee break just long enough for Elijah Johnson to squeeze through an impossible gap. And then, the strangest thing, I felt myself being carried upward through that raging water. Not like I was swimming, I'm a decent swimmer, but in that current with my clothes and boots weighing me down, I shouldn't have been able to make any headway at all. It was more like I was being lifted. Like unseen hands had grabbed me by the collar and were hauling me toward the surface. My lungs were burning, my chest tight, spots dancing before my eyes. But somehow I kept hold of that last breath. When my head broke the surface, I gasped for air, like a newborn taking his first breath. The sweet, sweet oxygen flooding into my starved lungs was the most amazing feeling I've ever known. The current was strong, trying to pull me downstream. The rain was still coming down in buckets, and the wind was howling like a pack of wolves. But somehow I found myself grabbing onto a tree branch that was hanging low over the water. It was like it was reaching out to me, offering salvation. I pulled myself toward the bank, inch by painful inch, my waterlogged clothes weighing me down. My strength was nearly gone when my feet finally touched the muddy shore. I dragged myself up onto the bank and collapsed under a big oak tree, exhausted and shivering, but alive when I had no right to be. I don't know how long I lay there in the rain. Might have been minutes, might have been hours. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the cold and shock taking their toll. But I remember one thing clear as day. I wasn't afraid. Despite being half drowned, injured, and lost in a storm, I felt a peace I hadn't known since I was a child. A certainty that whatever happened next, I wasn't alone. That same presence that had guided me out of the truck lifted me to the surface, led me to that branch. It was still with me, wrapped around me like a warm blanket despite the cold rain still falling. I want everyone watching to click that notification bell right now, because stories like mine, testimonies of God's amazing grace, they're getting rarer in this world of doubt and cynicism. But they're still happening every day, and this channel is dedicated to sharing them. You don't want to miss what God's doing in people's lives, do you? Every week, we've got new stories of His faithfulness, and I promise you they'll strengthen your faith and give you hope for whatever you're facing right now. When I finally came to Fully, the rain had stopped. Dawn was breaking through the clouds in the east, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I sat up, every muscle in my body protesting. My head was pounding, my throat raw from coughing up creek water. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The bridge was gone, completely washed away. Only the concrete supports remained, standing like tombstones in the still high water. My truck was nowhere to be seen, probably washed miles downstream. The landscape had been transformed by the flood. Trees uprooted, debris scattered everywhere, the familiar contours of the land reshaped by the water's power. I was on the wrong side of the creek, the side away from town, miles from any phone, so I started walking. My clothes were torn and muddy, my left shoe missing, my head pounding from both the accident and the whiskey that was still working its way through my system. But with every step, I felt something new growing inside me, gratitude, humility, a sense of purpose, and a certainty that what happened in that creek wasn't just luck or chance, it was divine intervention. A miracle with my name on it, and I knew, with a clarity I'd never experienced before, that I'd been given a second chance. Not just a second chance at life, but a second chance to be the man, the husband, the father I was meant to be. A highway patrolman found me round 6 in the morning, walking along Route 49. I must have been a sight, soaked to the bone, covered in mud, one shoe missing, a gash on my forehead crusted with dried blood. When he pulled over and got out, the look on his face told me I was a sight to behold. "Good Lord, man," he said, hand resting instinctively on his service weapon until he determined I wasn't a threat. "What happened to you?" I told him about the bridge, about my truck going into the creek, how I'd been trapped underwater but somehow escaped. I didn't mention the light or the hands, figured that was between me and God for now. But even my bare-bones account was enough to widen his eyes. "Son," he said, "you shouldn't be alive right now. We've already pulled 2 bodies from that creek this morning. A couple tried to cross in their station wagon about midnight. The water's running 15 feet deep and fast as a freight train. Nobody could swim in that." I just nodded and whispered, "I know." He took me to the hospital in Greenwood. The doctors there treated me for hypothermia and some cuts and bruises. Nothing serious, which was another miracle considering what I'd been through. One of the nurses called Martha. I'll never forget the look on her face when she came running into that emergency room, the kids right behind her. She was still in her church clothes. It was Sunday morning by then, and she looked like an angel to my tired eyes. She didn't yell, didn't scold, just threw her arms around me and cried. The kids joined in, all of us hugging and crying right there in the middle of the ER. I kept saying I was sorry over and over, and I was. Sorry for all the wasted years, sorry for the pain I'd caused them, sorry it took nearly dying to wake me up. And through her tears, Martha just kept saying, "You're alive. Thank you, Jesus, He's alive." 2 days later, I was still in the hospital when a visitor came to my room. It was that old man from the bar. He was dressed in a suit now with a clerical collar. Turned out he was Reverend Thomas from a church over in Indianola, retired now but still preaching occasionally. He wasn't supposed to be at Malco's that night, was just passing through town on his way home from visiting his daughter in Memphis when his car broke down. The garage couldn't fix it till morning, so he'd taken a room at the motel next to Malco's and wandered in for a bite to eat. "I was praying about you all night, Mr. Johnson," he said, sitting by my hospital bed. "The Lord woke me up at exactly 2:17 in the morning, and I just knew I needed to intercede for you. I've been a pastor for 45 years, and I've learned to recognize when the Spirit's moving me to pray." 2:17. That would have been right around the time I was underwater, praying the only prayer I knew how to pray. "Did you see anything unusual when you were in that water?" he asked, those penetrating eyes seeming to see right through me. I hesitated, then nodded. "A light and hands guiding me, lifting me." He smiled, not surprised at all. "The scriptures say his angels are ministering spirits, sent to serve those who will inherit salvation." He patted my hand. "I believe you had a divine encounter, Mr. Johnson. The Lord wasn't ready to call you home just yet. He's got more work for you to do here. If you've been moved by what you're hearing, I want to ask you to drop a hallelujah in the comments right now. Let's turn this comment section into a praise report, and if you've had your own should-have-died moment, share a little about it. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Ain't that how the body of Christ works? We comfort others with the same comfort we ourselves have received. The doctors released me the next day, but before I left, the head doctor asked to speak with me privately. Dr. Williams, he was. A serious man with salt and pepper hair and glasses that made his eyes look bigger than they were. He had some X-rays in his hand and a puzzled expression on his face. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "I'm not sure how to explain this. When we took these routine X-rays of your spine after the accident, we found something unusual. Something that, frankly, doesn't make medical sense." My heart started beating faster. Was there something wrong with me? Some injury from the accident they'd just discovered, but the doctor's next words weren't what I was expecting at all. He put the films up on a light box on the wall and pointed to my neck. "See this?" he said, pointing to a series of lines in the bones that looked like cracks to my untrained eye. "These are old fractures in your C4 vertebra. Based on the healing pattern, I'd say they happened at least 5 years ago." I nodded, not understanding the significance. "And?" "Mr. Johnson, this type of fracture typically results in complete quadriplegia. You shouldn't be able to move anything below your neck with an injury like this. By all medical science, you should have been paralyzed from this old injury. I can't explain how you've been walking around all these years, much less working at a lumber mill." I just stared at those X-rays, my mind struggling to comprehend what he was saying. Another miracle. The doctor was showing me that God had been protecting me long before that night in the creek, that his hand had been on me even when I was running from him. "When did this happen?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Did you have a serious accident years ago?" I thought back. "Probably when I fell from that scaffold at the mill about 5 years ago. Landed hard on my back, had a stiff neck for weeks, but never went to get it checked out. Couldn't afford to miss work, and we didn't have insurance back then." The doctor shook his head in disbelief. "Mr. Johnson, you're either the luckiest man alive or someone up there really likes you." I smiled, the first genuine smile in what felt like years. "It ain't luck, Doc, and after what happened in that creek, I aim to find out what the good Lord saved me for." When I got home, things started changing right away. First thing I did was pour every drop of liquor in the house down the drain. Had a bottle of whiskey hidden in the garage, another in my fishing tackle box. I got 'em all, every last drop. Martha watched without saying a word, tears in her eyes. Then I sat my family down and told them everything that happened in that creek. Not just the accident, but the light, the hands that seemed to guide me, the peace I felt afterwards. I told him about the old preacher, about what the doctor had discovered. I laid it all out, holding nothing back. I can't explain it, I told them, but I know this much. God gave me a second chance, and I ain't gonna waste it. Timothy, bless his heart, looked up at me with those innocent eyes and said, "Does this mean we can go fishing now, Daddy?" I scooped him up in my arms, hugging him tight. "Yes, son. First thing Saturday morning, you and me are going fishing." And that's a promise I aim to keep. The next Sunday, we all went to church together for the first time in years. I'd forgotten how beautiful the little white clapboard building looked, with its stained glass windows catching the morning sun. Pastor Wilson could hardly believe his eyes when I walked in with Martha and the kids. The congregation was singing Amazing Grace when we entered, and I near broke down right there in the aisle. How appropriate those words were. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. I felt like the prodigal son coming home after years in the wilderness. Some folks stared, couldn't blame 'em. Elijah Johnson, the town drunk, standing in church sober on a Sunday morning, might as well have been seeing a ghost. But others, the ones who'd been praying for me, I suspect, had tears in their eyes. Mrs. Peterson, who taught Sunday school, reached out and squeezed my hand as we walked to our seats. Brother Jenkins, the deacon who'd visited me in the hospital years back after a work accident, nodded with a smile that said, "Welcome home." After the service, I asked Pastor Wilson if I could say a few words to the congregation. He seemed surprised but nodded and handed me the microphone. My hands were shaking as I walked to the front of the church. Public speaking had never been my thing, and here I was about to bare my soul to the whole town. But something gave me courage. The same presence I'd felt in that creek, I reckon. "My name is Elijah Johnson," I began, my voice shaken. "Most of you all know me, or know of me. Probably seen me stumbling out of Malco's on a Friday night more times than I can count. Probably heard me cussing up a storm when my truck wouldn't start, or when the mill had to work overtime. Probably told your children not to be like that Johnson fella." There were a few uncomfortable chuckles, but mostly just silence. I could feel Martha's supportive gaze from the front pew. But last week, God reached down into Roebuck Creek and pulled this sinner from the water and from a life of destruction. I ain't standing here today by accident or by luck. I'm here 'cause the good Lord's got more work for me to do, and I aim to find out what that is. Oh, you know what happened next? I'd appreciate it if you'd make sure to give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find these testimonies of God's amazing grace. And don't forget, every week we're bringing you new stories of how the Lord is working in people's lives today. Your likes and shares help spread the good news. And couldn't we all use a little more good news these days? First Sunday back at church, people looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. Some folks thought I was just spinning tales. Others figured it was just a temporary change. I'd be back at Malco's by Friday. But as time went on, and they saw the change in me, how I put down the bottle for good, how I started being there for my family, they knew something real had happened to old Elijah Johnson. That first month wasn't easy. My body was used to alcohol, had been for years, and it protested loudly at its absence. I had nightmares about drowning, would wake up gasping for air, the sheets soaked with sweat. The cravings would hit me like a freight train, especially after a hard day at the mill. But Martha was there, steady as a rock. The church folks rallied around us too. Brother Jenkins started picking me up for a men's Bible study on Wednesday nights. Mrs. Peterson would drop by with casseroles and cakes just to check in. And Timothy, that boy's face every time I came home sober was all the motivation I needed. 6 months after the accident, We had a baptism service down at that very same creek, though a different spot, mind you, away from where the bridge had been. It was a beautiful spring day, the dogwoods and redbuds all in bloom, the water running clear and peaceful, nothing like the raging torrent it had been that night. I stood in that water, the same water that should have been my grave, and Pastor Wilson dipped me under, buried with Christ in baptism, raised to walk in newness of life, he said as I came up spluttering. The congregation on the bank was singing and clapping, and Martha was crying those happy tears again. When I came up, it felt like I was being rescued all over again. Staying sober wasn't always easy. The devil don't let go without a fight. There were nights when the craving for whiskey was so strong, I'd pace the floor, praying out loud, reciting every Bible verse I could remember. "Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world," I'd say over and over. Martha would get up and sit with me, reading scripture until the urge passed. Timothy, bless his heart, started keeping a calendar of how many days his daddy had been sober. That boy's faith in me was sometimes the only thing that kept me going when the cravings hit hard. And I did take him fishing just like I promised. Not just once, but every Saturday for years. We'd get up before dawn, pack sandwiches Martha had made the night before, and head out to our special spot on Roebuck Creek, far upstream from the accident site. Those mornings on the water with my son were precious beyond words. We'd talk about everything under the sun: school, girls, God. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, watching the mist rise off the water, listening to the birds waking up. Timothy caught his first bass on one of those trips, a 5-pounder that was nearly as big as he was. I've never seen a prouder grin on that boy's face. Word of my experience spread through the community. At first, as I said, there was skepticism. But when the sheriff dragged what was left of my truck from the creek 2 months later, even the doubters had to admit it was a miracle anyone had survived. The cab was crushed beyond recognition, the current and debris having done their work. The sheriff himself came by the house to show me pictures, shaking his head in disbelief. "Lijah," he said, "in 30 years of law enforcement, I ain't never seen nobody walk away from something like this. You ought to be dead 10 times over." I just nodded and said, "Yes, sir, I should, but God had other plans." I started visiting the jail on Tuesdays, talking to men who were where I'd been, trapped in addiction, separated from their families, running from God. I didn't preach at them. Just told my story and listened to theirs. Some of them laughed in my face, some cried. A few found their way to church after they got out. One fella, Tyrone was his name, later told me that hearing my story was the first time he'd felt hope in 15 years. He's a deacon at the church now, believe it or not, and runs a recovery program that's helped dozens of men. I ain't gonna pretend it was all smooth sailing from there. Life has its ups and downs, whether you're walking with the Lord or not. There were still bills to pay, still disagreements with Martha, still days when the mill work left me bone-tired. Michael decided to join the military instead of finishing college, which worried his mama something fierce. Ruth went through a rebellious phase in her late teens that had us on our knees every night. The recession in the early 80s hit Greenwood hard, and the mill cut back my hours for almost a year. Life wasn't perfect after that night. Had my struggles, my doubts. When Martha got sick with cancer 10 years ago, I questioned God something fierce. Couldn't understand why he'd saved me from that creek, only to take my Martha away. I was angry, bitter even. Stopped going to church for a few weeks, started having those old cravings again. But one night, sitting by Martha's hospital bed while she slept, I felt that same presence I'd felt in the creek. That same peace. And I knew somehow that God was still in control, still had a plan, even if I couldn't see it. Martha fought that cancer with the same quiet strength she'd shown all her life, never complained, never asked why me, just faced each day with faith and grace. The whole church rallied around us, bringing meals, driving her to appointments in Jackson when I couldn't get off work, sitting with her when the chemo made her too weak to get out of bed. Those were dark days, but even in them dark valleys, I remembered that night in the creek, remembered those hands that saved me when I didn't deserve saving. Martha went home to be with the Lord 5 years ago, peaceful in her sleep, with me and the kids around her bed. Before she passed, she held my hand and said, "Elijah, God saved you that night so you could be here with me all these extra years, so you could see our grandchildren, so you could tell this story. Don't you ever stop telling it." And that's exactly what I'm doing now, telling this story to anyone who'll listen, not because I'm special, but because God's grace is special. Because God's the kind of Father who'll reach into the darkest waters to save his children. Because sometimes we need reminding that miracles still happen, that prayers still get answered, that the same God who parted the Red Sea and raised Lazarus from the dead is still in the business of the impossible. I retired from the mill a few years back, but I keep busy. Got me a little workshop in the garage where I make birdhouses and rocking horses for the grandkids. I teach a Sunday school class for men in recovery. I still visit the jail every Tuesday, and every October 13th I go back to that creek, to where the old bridge used to be, and I thank God for saving me. For giving me all these extra years with Martha, for letting me see my children grow up, for the chance to know my grandchildren. Some folks ask me why God chose to save a drunk like me that night when good people die every day. Why he reached down into Roebuck Creek for Elijah Johnson when others was lost in that same flood. I don't have no fancy theological answer. All I know is grace, unmerited favor. God looked at this sinful, broken man and said, "Not yet. I ain't done with you yet." Every morning when I open my eyes, I remember I'm living on borrowed time. Every day since October 13th, 1978 has been extra. A gift I didn't earn and don't deserve. That's why you'll never hear me complaining about getting old. These wrinkles, these aching joints, these reading glasses I can never find when I need 'em. They're all testaments to God's mercy. Every grey hair on my head is a reminder that I'm still here when I should have been gone decades ago. I still drive by what's left of that old bridge sometimes. They built a new one, bigger and stronger, about 100 yards downstream. But I can still see those old concrete supports standing in the water. They remind me how quickly the things we trust in can be washed away. Our health, our jobs, our plans, even our loved ones. They remind me that our only true safety is in the hands of the one who made the waters in the first place. I got a call last year from a young man I didn't recognize at first. Turned out to be the son of Jerome, my old friend from the mill who'd tried to get me to leave Malco's that night. Jerome had passed on, and his boy was going through some of his daddy's things. Found a letter Jerome had written but never sent, addressed to me. In it, Jerome said he'd been praying for me every day since that night. Said he'd felt guilty for years, that he hadn't been more insistent about getting me to leave the bar. Said when he heard I'd survived, he knew it was nothing short of a miracle. That letter was like hearing from Jerome one last time, and it reminded me again how many people had been part of my story without me even knowing it. And last month, I met a nurse at the hospital when I was there for my regular checkup. She looked at my chart, then at me, then back at the chart again. "Are you the Elijah Johnson who went into Roebuck Creek during the flood of '78? She asked, her eyes wide. When I nodded, she told me her father had been on the rescue team that searched the creek after the flood. He'd told her about the truck they'd found, about how nobody could have survived that. She said her daddy wasn't a religious man, but he'd always pointed to my case as the one thing he couldn't explain. The one thing that made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something bigger than himself out there. That's the ripple effect of a miracle, you see. It don't just change one life. It touches everyone who hears about it, everyone who witnesses it. It plants a seed of faith, a question that can't be answered by science or logic alone. Now, I don't know what creek you might be drowning in today. Might be addiction like mine was. Might be anger or unforgiveness. Might be doubt or fear. Might be grief or loneliness. But I'm here to tell you that the same hands that pulled me from those waters are reaching for you right now. The same God who saw fit to save a drunk like me is watching over you, knows your struggles, hears your prayers. I'm not promising your problems will disappear overnight. Mine sure didn't. Had to face the consequences of my drinking, had to rebuild trust with my family, had to make amends to people I'd hurt, had to fight those cravings one day at a time. But what I am promising is that you don't have to face those waters alone. The same Jesus who calmed the storm and walked on water is just a prayer away. Before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you for spending this time with me today. If my story has touched your heart, would you consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it? And remember, we've got new testimonies coming every week, so make sure you're subscribed and got them notifications turned on. Your story might be next. God's still in the miracle business, and I'd love to hear how He's worked in your life. Psalm 40 says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in Him. That's my testimony, and it can be yours too. I should have died that night. By all natural laws, I should be long gone. But God blocked it. And if He did it for an old sinner like me, why not you? God bless you all. And remember, no matter how deep the water, His arms are longer. No matter how dark the night, His light is brighter. And no matter how far you've gone, the way back home is just one prayer away. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Elijah's porch, he leaned back in his rocking chair, his weathered Bible open on his lap. There was a contentment about him, a peace that comes from knowing exactly why you're still here and what you're meant to do with the time you've been given. I thanked him for sharing his story, for his openness and honesty. As I packed up my recording equipment, he reached out and grasped my arm with surprising strength. Remember, he said, his voice low and earnest, miracles ain't just things that happened in Bible times. They're happening all around us every day. Sometimes we just need to have eyes to see 'em. I nodded, knowing he was right. In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, Elijah Johnson's story stands as a powerful reminder that sometimes, between life and death, between despair and hope, between drowning and breathing, there is a divine intervention, a moment when God says, "Not yet."